Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the extra session. Um, so what we're learning this quarter is sort of the vanilla JavaScript. JavaScript used without any sort of extra features. And one of the things about vanilla JavaScript is it can be really kind of cumbersome. When we fetch information from the DOM, when we create new objects and inject them into the DOM, when we attach event handlers, when we a lot of the DOM operations are a little bit kludgy. They involve several different steps. Ajax in particular, Ajax involves several different steps. It used to be that it was worse than it is now. Actually, it's a little bit easier now. The successive revisions to the DOM and to Ajax have made them a little bit less kludgy, a little bit less clunky. But back in the beginning, when JavaScript and Ajax really started to be used heavily, developers are like, there's all this stuff that I'm just doing all the time that's really like, I could write a function to do this stuff. I could write a function to do this stuff, a lot easier. Just pass certain parameters to the function, and it'll take care of all the details for me. All I got to do is call the function, and my code will be much cleaner. And then eventually people started to say, well, we're doing this a lot. Let's write a library of functions that we can call that will do this stuff for us. Sort of a standardized library that everybody can use that will take care of all these nitty-gritty details for us and clean up our code a lot. So that's how JavaScript libraries started to come about. JavaScript libraries were just sets of functions that people wrote to make things easier, to factor out lots of the ugliness in their code when using the DOM. And one of them is called jQuery. There are several different JavaScript libraries. There's one called Prototype. Prototype is the one that's focused on in the book. There's one called MooTools, Dojo. I think Twitter Bootstrap has a JavaScript component to it as well. There are lots of different JavaScript libraries out there. Each one goes about like making things more easy in a different way. But the most popular one currently is jQuery, and that's partly because it's incredibly powerful and it makes things very concise, very succinct. It allows you to do very much with very little code. So it's the most popular one that exists right now, and we'll talk about that for the rest of today's extra session. First off, I want to take a look at objects in JavaScript. And this is going to be sort of a sneak preview of what we're going to be doing next week. We're going to be looking at JSON next week. And one of the most important features, not the most important, but one of the most novel features of JavaScript is the way that you declare objects, literal objects. If I want a literal object, objects and arrays, actually. Arrays are very concise. If I want a new object with two different properties, I just put it in curlies, var_foo equals curlies, and then I have a key called bar, its value is booyah. I have another key called baz, its value is 42. So this is just a literal object. I can alert foo.bar, it'll alert booyah. I can alert foo.baz, it alerts 42. Right? So I reach into the object to get its properties. Foo.quux is a new property as well. I can alert that, and so on. So this is a very clean, concise way of declaring objects in JavaScript. And we're going to be making use of this object syntax a lot in jQuery. So we'll focus on three different things today. Querying the DOM using jQuery, so querying the DOM meaning fetching elements from the DOM, inspecting and changing DOM elements with jQuery, so modifying the text inside of DOM objects, modifying their attributes, things like that, and then creating new elements and injecting them into the page. So basically, we're going to be covering things. All three of these things are things that we've done with the vanilla DOM and JavaScript. We're going to be seeing how to do these using jQuery instead. And then next week, we're going to be looking at, once we've finished looking at all of Ajax, for next week's extra session, we'll be looking at how to do Ajaxian stuff with jQuery as well. So, things we do with the DOM. We use the DOM for all of these things. We use the DOM to get access to specific elements in the DOM, in the HTML document. Attach event handlers, for example, to buttons, or for the window.onload event handler, form submission event handlers, things like that. We use it to set styles on elements, change colors and font sizes and stuff, as well as to get styles, to see what styles are applied to things. Show and hide elements. If we want to make an element disappear, we can set its style.display to be none. If we want it to show up again, we can revert its style.display to to be shown again. We can create new elements. Document.createElement. Inject them into the page using like append child or insert before, those kinds of things. We modify the contents, properties, and attributes of existing elements. Contents with like inner HTML. Properties by setting like .checked to be false or something like that, or like .value to be something else, and also reading the existing properties. We can see whether .checked is true or false. We can see what the value is in some text box. And attributes, we can figure out attributes end up becoming properties for the most part. And we can also make Ajax requests. So Ajax requests is something that we're going to be looking at in next week's extra session. But all of these things are things that JavaScript libraries make easier. In particular, jQuery has a particularly concise syntax. So that's one of the things that makes it the most popular JavaScript library. So in order to include the jQuery JavaScript library in the page, we simply need to add a script tag that loads the JavaScript, the jQuery library, before any of our code that needs to use it. So we usually just load this thing first, and then any of our own JavaScript code comes after it. That's because this needs to be loaded into the global namespace in order for our code to make use of it. So this has to be loaded first, then our code can use it. It's the most popular JavaScript library used by 55% of the 10,000 most popular websites. Google, WordPress, and Drupal all use it, among many, many, many others. Very active user community, lots of resources available. It's extensible with plugins. It's pretty small and efficient relatively. It can be kind of bulky at times, but actually one of the main ways of alleviating that is you'll notice that I'm linking to this on ajax.googleapis.com. Any ideas why I'm doing that? I could simply just download a local copy of jQuery. So I'm loading this file here, jquery.min.js. I could just download a local copy of jquery.min.js, put it in the directory for my website, and just load that. I could just say, just load jquery.min.js. Why am I loading it from this website? He said, does Google have a very robust version of it? Well, I mean, I could just download this exact copy if I wanted to. Robust, well, okay, so the main reason, so this is what's called a CDN, Content Delivery Network. Ajax.googleapis.com is a server that's set up, or a set of servers that are set up to handle lots and lots of requests daily and cache very heavily. The great thing about this is that if everybody uses something at ajax.googleapis.com, or if everybody uses something at another CDN, if everybody links to the same file, then when you visit multiple websites that use this same version of jQuery, then your browser doesn't have to re-download it or reinterpret it. Your browser can cache the downloaded version, and your pages, at least when the jQuery library is cached, your page loads will be much faster. So this isn't like a super big download. It's only like, I don't know, maybe 100K or so. It's not huge, but when a lot of people, everybody, a lot of different people from a lot of different websites link to the same version of the file, then the browser doesn't have to load that file as often. If everybody had their own local copy of jquery.min.js, then every new website you went to, it would have to re-download that new file every time. Anyhow, so that's why we're linking to it at a centralized location. And Google APIs is one of the locations that a lot of people use. Okay, so it's relatively small and efficient. It can be kind of inefficient at times. We'll take a look at when and how to make it as efficient as possible. It's super easy to use. It's really straightforward. Once you understand the concept of jQuery objects, it's really, really nice and straightforward. So the main way we use jQuery is through what's called the jQuery function. This function here, it's named a $, but we never call it the $ function. We call it the jQuery function. So $, and the parameter that takes, most often we just pass it a CSS style selector. This, as I mentioned when we on Monday when we looked at querying the DOM using the standard DOM, this is the equivalent to query selector all. The selector that we pass here is just like the selector that we pass to query selector all. In fact, jQuery was the inspiration for query selector all. Once jQuery decided that this was a great idea and they implemented it and it became really, really popular, then the folks who were updating the next revision of the DOM were like, we should just add this functionality to the DOM because it's a great idea. So it takes a CSS style selector as its parameter, and it returns a set of results. You can also, instead of using $, you can also spell it out, jQuery, if you want, but most often people use $, just because it's quick to type. So for example, if we want to get the OK button on the page, we say, hash OK, and that returns the OK button. It's the most powerful and frequently used function in jQuery. You can use any CSS style selector, so it can be much more complex. Selects and returns elements from the DOM matching that selector. Yeah, so most people use the $, but it's not called the $, function, it's called the jQuery function. Attaching an event handler the jQuery way. So every time you call the jQuery function, it returns a jQuery object that can then that you can call methods on. You can call jQuery methods on. One of the jQuery methods is .click, and .click, you pass to it the name of a function that you want to call, and what it does is it goes through every element that was returned by this jQuery query, and it attaches that click handler to all of them. So in this case, I'm only, there's only one element of a particular ID on the page at any given time, but this could select several different things. This could select every element on the page. For example, if I put star in here, then I would be selecting every element on the page. I could put a class in here, and maybe there might be a single element with that class. There might be 10,000 elements with that class. The great thing about this is that, so this returns that set of results. .click will go through each of the results and attach this event handler to every single one of them. Just in one fell swoop, I've attached a click handler to all of them. In the vanilla DOM, I have to get this list of results, loop over them, and for each ith element, attach the click handler to them. jQuery just attaches it to all of them, which is great. It also accounts for many browser differences. It'll attach the event handler in a way that is best for the particular browser that's being used. So the other great thing about JavaScript libraries is that they handle browser discrepancies really elegantly. There are lots and lots of quirks and differences between browsers, especially when you start to get back into older versions of IE, IE 8, IE 7, IE 6. There are lots of quirks and the way that Internet Explorer handled things for a long time was very different than the way that the rest of browsers handled things. And as a result, if you used vanilla JavaScript, you would have to manually account for all those differences. You'd have to figure out exactly when Internet Explorer is quirky and figure out exactly how to work around it. Well, why not just use a single library where they've had many, many years to refine the way that they deal with these browser quirks? It's why reinvent the wheel when somebody else has gone to the trouble of accounting for all of these browser quirks and making this click function account for those browser differences, so you don't even have to worry about it. So that's one of the other major features of JavaScript libraries. It attaches click handlers to every element in the list, and it does so in a way that you can attach multiple click handlers to the same event. So we started to use add event listener. Add event listener allows you to attach multiple handlers to the same element, and so it basically, for newer browsers, it does precisely that. It just says .add add event listener. You can use any of the standard JavaScript events. Each one of them has their own method. So .mouse up, .mouse over, .key press, .focus, .submit. All of these have just a method in jQuery. It's just called a method. So for if you want to, one of them is the sort of equivalent to the window.onload. In jQuery, rather than saying window.onload or even window.addEventListener, blah, 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 because window.addEventListener is not compatible with some of the older versions of IE, what jQuery does is it provides this document.ready, and this will account for browser differences and browser quirks, and it'll do the same thing. So you wrap document in this jQuery object, and then you call .ready on it. That basically just says, when the document is ready, then I'm going to call page load. Selecting elements from the DOM. Typically, we just, most frequently, we just use the jQuery function to fetch a bunch of elements. So this will select all A tags inside any LIs with a class of selected inside the header area. And that'll return a list of those elements. But the list of those elements that are returned, you'll notice that I've named this with a $sign. So in PHP, all variables are named with $signs. In JavaScript, variables are not typically named with $signs, but the $sign is a valid, in JavaScript, the $sign is a valid character that can be used in variable names and function names. That's why this function even exists, right? So this jQuery function, we're calling a function here. The function is called $sign, right? So somewhere in the jQuery code, they've written function $sign, CSS selector, and they're do something with CSS selector, right? So this is just a function. In JavaScript, they just decided that $sign would be a valid character in identifiers, and not only that, you can just name a function $sign if you want to. What I'm doing with this is, so the jQuery function doesn't return a list of DOM objects, just a list of DOM objects. It actually returns a jQuery function, a jQuery object, which is a special object which has all these methods attached to it. And then inside of it, wrapped up inside of it, there is also a list of the DOM objects that were returned by that query. So we'll just take a look at, let's see, so we'll just take a look, let's clear those errors, var foo equals $ dot, let's see, we'll say slides equals $ dot slide. So there are several slides in this deck, so each is a div with a class of slide. We're going to get a list of all the slides. Slides. Okay, so this is a list of all of the slides. But if we look at, so this is a jQuery object. This jQuery object has methods that are attached to it, and let's see. I would like to see the methods that are attached to it. I'm trying to think of how I can do that. This is outputting like a textual representation of it. Well, let's see. I can say $slides.click. This is the function that allows me to attach a click handler. So .click is one of the many methods that are attached to this jQuery object. So var slides equals .slide. I can say $slides.click something, $slides.mouse up something, $slides. Whatever. I can't do this with what's returned by, for example, query selector all. Var slides equals query document dot query selector all dot slide. This is an array that contains a list of all the slide elements, the slide DOM objects. This is a special jQuery object. The thing about this is that it contains this inside of it. So it contains this exact list of slides somewhere inside of it as a property. But it also has all of these additional methods and things that you can call on it. So this isn't strictly a set of DOM objects. It's an object that also contains a list of DOM objects. Okay, so that returned a list of all the slides. To indicate that this is a jQuery object instead of just like an array or like a single element or whatever, and that I can actually run jQuery functions on this object, it's kind of a convention to put a $sign at the beginning of this variable. You don't have to do that. It's okay if you don't. You certainly should not put a $sign in front of anything that isn't the jQuery object. So anything that the jQuery function returns is a jQuery object, but you should not do, for example, this. $slides equals query selector all dot slide. That's not a good thing because this is not actually a jQuery object. This is just a regular array. Okay, so once I've created this jQuery object contains inside of it a list of all of the elements that were returned. I can also say links.add this other selector, this complete other. I can just add this other set of elements that with a completely different selector. I'm adding them to this pool of elements that this DOM object, that this jQuery object contains. And then I can add some more, and then for all of those things, I just attach a click handler. So .add allows you to add to an existing set of elements. The selectors that you can use in the jQuery function and in the add function are basically any CSS style selector. You can use all of the CSS 1 and 2 selectors, star, some ID class. You can separate, you can have multiple selectors separated with commas, ancestor descendant selector, child selector, all this stuff, first child, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff you can do. You can also use more like CSS3 stuff, enable, disabled, checked, nth child, first child, stuff like that. There are also a few additional things that jQuery has added. These aren't part of any CSS standard, but jQuery allows you in the selector, it allows you to use these as well, and jQuery handles those specially. So even and odd, if there's like, even and odd children. Yeah, visible, anything that's visible or hidden, stuff like that. Once you've gotten a list of results, you can filter them and exclude certain elements. You can get only the first element or the last element, or you can get an element at a particular index in that array. You can get a slice of the elements and filter them down into only ones that match this selector. So for example, if I get all of these A's inside LIs with a class of selected inside of the header, that's a list of links. If I want to exclude the one with the ID of contact, then I just say links.not_contact. And that removes that element from this set of links. I can get the first row of this table by selecting all of the TRs in that table and then calling .first. And that will be the first element. I'm trying to remember, I think first actually returns a DOM object, like an actual DOM object, not a jQuery object. It's possible that it doesn't. If it returns a DOM object, then I should not have named these variables with $signs. This should just be without $signs, because the $sign indicates the jQuery object. Let's see. You can also traverse the DOM next and previous. The great thing about next and previous is that they exclude those useless white space text nodes. You remember when we looked at on Monday, we looked at the example, the div that had a P inside of it, but because there was indentation, the div actually had 3 children. There was the white space before the P, there was the P itself, and there was the white space after the P. There was just like a new line or something. So it had 3 DOM element children. Next and previous skip over those. It skips, so they skip over text nodes and only go to just actual elements. .children gets all the children of each element. Parent gets the parent of each element, and so on. So if I find all things with a class of foo, foos, so that's a list of foos, foos.parent. This, for each foo, it gets the parent of foo. So this is a list of, for each foo, it's that foo's parent. It's no longer foo, it's that foo's parent. This is a set of ancestors, all the ancestors of foos and so on. Foos.parent.siblings, stuff like that. You can, yeah, aunts and uncles, I guess. Children, stuff like that. Find is also useful. You can find a list item within, these foos, for example. Like if one of the foos, if any of the foos has a list item inside it, then this will return list of the LIs in the foos. A note about efficiency. So, we haven't, yeah, here we go. Setting styles with jQuery. So once we have a set of elements, we can set CSS properties on all of those elements using .css. If we want to get the value, we just specify a single parameter. And if we specify just a single parameter, it'll return the value of that. If we want to set the value for it, then we specify a second parameter, which is the new value that it should be set to. This is awesome because it completely takes care of the difference between setting .style.something versus using like getComputedStyle. This just automatically, you just use the same function. If you want to get the value, you just pass a single parameter. If you want to set the value, you pass the second parameter. It's great. It's much cleaner and much more efficient. So a::link.css text decoration none. So we're removing the text decoration from all A's when they are just from all A's. We're getting the top margin of all P's here. Actually, this is I'm not quite sure what this will do, because all P's on the page might have different top margins. So I'm not really sure what this is going to return. If this is going to return an array of all the top margins, I'm not quite sure. Right. So back here to efficiency. One of the things that I don't want to do, if I want to set multiple styles on the same set of elements, so if I'm selecting all foos on the page and I want to set 3 different properties on that entire set, I don't want to do this. I don't want to find all the foos and set this property on them, then find all the foos again and set this property on them, and then find all the foos a third time and set this new property on them. What I want to do is find all the foos once, save that to a list of the foos, and then on that list of foos set the same property 3 times, or set the 3 different properties. So you should never do more than maybe 2, maybe more than 1 actually. You should never do more than 1 fetch of the same set of elements. If you need to do multiple things with that set, do it by saving that set into an element and modifying that set. Adding and removing classes, add class, remove class, toggle class, adds it if it's not there, removes it if it's there. Has class returns true or false if it's there. Very useful. .attr is how you set attributes. So .attr href, for example, would get the value for href. If you want to set the href value, then you'd say .attr href, and you want to set this new value. Remove attribute just completely eliminates that attribute. If you want to remove the size attribute from a text field, then you can just say .remove attr size. So let's see. An image whose ID is puppies, I'm going to set its source attribute to be hoff.jpg instead. And this is different. This is in place of document.getElement by ID puppies.source equals, right? So I'm setting the source attribute using .attr. Form properties .val is the value inside of a text field. So it can be very confusing when using jQuery. It's tempting to say just .value, but because this is a jQuery object, it's not a DOM object. It's a jQuery object. In order to get the value of the element inside the jQuery object, you use .val. It's a method that you run on it. You can't just say .value. You would have to say .value on one of the elements that this jQuery object contains, not on the jQuery object itself. In order to see if something is checked, you can use .is::checked. If you want to set the checked property, you say prop. So prop allows you to change DOM properties. There's a slight difference between attributes and properties. For example, checked starts out as an attribute, and then it gets parsed as a Boolean property on that DOM object. So that DOM object now contains a .checked property that you can set to true or false. But it started out as a checked attribute, checked equals checked attribute. Let's see, selected, disabled, same kind of stuff. So hash netid.val mduci, that sets the value of whatever is named netid to be mduci, presumably that's a text box. Vegetarian.prop checked false. So that finds whatever is called vegetarian, sets its checked property to false. Presumably that's a checkbox. Submit.prop disabled true. Presumably this is a submit button. We're setting its disabled property to true, so it can no longer be clicked. So we get our set the value with .val. Yeah, so in order to get the value, you just do .val with no parameters. If you want to set the value, you pass a new parameter, which represents the new value. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So in the standard DOM, the way that we inject text into a page, into an element, or we get text from that element, is we use .innerHTML. In jQuery, there are two different approaches. So we sort of overload this inner HTML to set text as well as like inner HTML. If we want to put HTML inside that element, we can. But we use it for both HTML and text. In jQuery, it's split into separate methods for text and HTML. So if I want to get all the text inside of this element, I say this set of elements, I use .text. That returns the just plain text with all HTML stripped out of it. If I want to set the text inside of it to be a new value, then I pass the parameter. If I want to get the HTML inside of it, then I use .html. It will not strip out any HTML like it would with text. And if I want to actually inject HTML like the original intention of .innerHTML, then I can pass some HTML code into .html. So mission.text would get the value inside of the mission element. I can change that if I want to. I can inject some new HTML code into something called plan, and so on. Okay, the last thing that we're going to discuss today is creating new nodes and injecting them into the page. There are two different ways of creating a new element. You can either sort of take the traditional approach, document.createElement tag name, and then wrap that in the jQuery function. So this is a DOM node. We're passing that to the jQuery function, and that wraps it in a jQuery object so that we can call .click on it or .attr, stuff like that. Or there's an alternative syntax that you can use. If you want to create an element, so this is the jQuery function again, if you begin and end the name of your tag with like angle brackets, then jQuery will parse this as creating a new element instead of selecting elements. So typically, our parameter to the jQuery function is a CSS selector. If it's got these angle brackets, then it knows that you want to create an element instead of selecting elements. In either case, actually, you can pass a second parameter if you want of attributes that you want to set on that element. And this is a literal JavaScript object. So for example, we're creating an H2 here. We can set its text to be this is a heading, its color to be green, and so on. We can also, in a single statement, we can create an H2 by using the second syntax. And then as a second parameter, we can pass a literal object that contains properties that we want to set on it. So like if we want to set the text inside of it, we say text. And then, so this is the first time I've illustrated, well, sort of. This is kind of the first time I've illustrated what's called chaining. So I have this call to the jQuery function here. And then to that, I add .css. I can chain even further if I want to. So I'm setting the CSS color, I'm setting the color to be green. If I also want to attach a click handler to this thing, I just add .click to the end of this. And then if I also want to change an attribute, I can add .attr to the end of that. So we can actually go arbitrarily long. If we have this heading thing, we can just say .click, foo, run the foo function when it's clicked, attr I wouldn't want to set class, or I can set ID to be bar. I can say dot I don't know. We could chain this pretty much indefinitely. We could attach several different event handlers to it. Dot mouse move. So anytime I move the mouse over this thing, I could call Baz, whatever. So this is what's called chaining. And basically, I'm just adding these additional jQuery calls to this element. I do this to a certain extent, and everybody does this to a certain extent. But you can see that this is getting kind of long and getting kind of unreadable. So I might do this. I might say another new heading. We'll just call this h2 is this new h2 element. We'll set its text. No, we'll do this. We'll not set its text in the second parameter there, and we'll just say h2.text. No, we'll do this, .text. This is another heading. There we go. And then maybe we'll do like the event handlers all at once. We'll do like h2.click, foo.mouseMoveBaz. And then we'll end that line and we'll do some more. h2.css color green. And h2.attr ID Baz. So this is a lot more readable. I can do a little bit of chaining. Maybe chain a couple of things together. But then later on, I probably want to do. I don't want to do too much chaining. I can kind of split it up. Okay, injecting a new element into the page. There are 3 different ways of, actually 8 different ways of inserting something into the page. Prepend and append and before and after are sort of the core concepts. If I have a new object that I want to insert into this target element, so this target element will be like the result of a jQuery function. I want to insert it into the main div, so I'll do like jQuery #main here dot prepend this new thing that I've created. This will add it at the beginning as its first child, and append as it at the end as its last child. Append to and prepend to and insert before and insert after are sort of the reverse. It's just sort of the roles are swapped. So I have this new object, and I'm going to add that new object to this target element. This new object I'm going to add to this target element. So the target over here is on the left, and the new object is on the right, and here it's just reversed. Target.before new object, let's see. So what this will do is this will add this new object as a sibling, a previous sibling of this target. And this will be a next sibling of this target. And then again, these are just reversed. The order is reversed. So I think I've got on this slide, when I click this slide, it says a span, a span, a span, a span, a span. Every time I'm appending a new span to main. So I create a span, I set its text to a span, and then I append that new element to whatever has the ID of main. So this is common. This is a common sort of chaining kind of thing to do when you're creating new elements. More examples there. I don't need to go into those. Removing a node from the page. I sort of mentioned on Monday that JavaScript libraries make removing easier. In vanilla, you have to say like that element dot parent node dot remove child of that element, right? Well, jQuery just says remove it, and it's just an alias for doing the longer version. Okay. if you want to temporarily remove an element from the DOM without actually deleting that element, if you want to remove it from one place and add it back to another place, you can also do detach. Detach is it removes it, but it doesn't destroy that element. It doesn't. It allows you to still do something with that element. So let's. Okay. Last few slides here before we'll get into actually writing some code. No, actually, let's get into writing some code now. So what I want to do is I want to extra for jQuery. I want to adapt our rects example to basically to rewrite it using jQuery. Extra for jQuery rects. So this is our JavaScript code here, and we're going to be modifying all of the event handlers and stuff like that to do this using jQuery instead. Let's get rid of that. We're still going to use strict. We're still going to have this global variable here for dragging. Actually, no. Let's modify the. Let's do the other version that we had before. Rects. That's a complete version, and we'll fix the problem that we had. Problem that we had was in Go Psychedelic. Okay. Open this up. jQuery rects. Rect.html. There we go. Color. Excellent. Okay. So so we're going to be modifying this to do everything that we did before, but using jQuery. The equivalent to window.onload in jQuery. Do you remember that one? Yeah, the ready. And so we're going to call .ready on a jQuery function and on a jQuery object. So we have to do this, something.ready. And in order to, so what we want to do is we want to call it on the document because that's what jQuery attaches this event handler to. When the document is ready, then we're going to run this function. Function blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we can basically just cut all of this stuff into there. Document.ready is this anonymous function. We're going to create 50 recs, move them all around the page. We're going to modify these here. We can basically say $. These are all IDs, so we add a hash there. And then instead of add event listener, click blah, 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 dot click, move rects, dot click, go psychedelic, and dot submit, add rects. So this attaches the click handler move rects to everything in here. Again, if this was like, you know, dot rectangle or something, then I would attach the move rects event handler to every rectangle on the page. In fact, why don't we just do that? Refresh the page here. We have an error here somewhere. Document.ready function. Oh, okay. $sign is not defined. What do you think this means? What's that? Yeah, well, we didn't link to jQuery. So jQuery is not loaded. So jQuery hasn't created this $sign function yet. So we completely forgot to actually load jQuery. And in order to load jQuery, we have to link to it over here in the HTML. We have to say, we have to add this script tag, which will link to it at the Google APIs. I think we're up to 10.2 now. So we'll link to that properly. And now, so once this JavaScript file has been loaded, this adds a $ function, the jQuery function, to the global scope so that this file can make use of it. Okay. I'll color. And then what I did was I attached the moveRects event handler to every rectangle on the page. When any rectangle on the page is clicked, each one also has the remove here. So we'll redo that. Disable the remove, and then when I click it, what's that? Say it again. Oh, rectangle. There we go. Okay. So every time I click any one of these, it calls moveRects, which will move all of them around the page. And I've attached that in one fell swoop. If I wanted to do this with the standard DOM, what I'd have to do is I'd have to say var rects equals document.query selector all dot rectangle for var I equals 0, I less than rects dot length I plus plus rects at I dot add event listener click move rects. So this is exactly equivalent to that. Much shorter, much more concise. And not only that, but so if I want to have a different click handler or move event handler or something, mouse move, some other function foo. Up here I'd have to do this, foo, which I mean that's not too much more, right? But for everything that I need to do with this, I'm going to have a new line, a new something. So the jQuery syntax is much shorter. We'll revert this to, what was it? Move. It was the move button. So that when the move button is clicked, we're going to move them, right? Okay, excellent. Okay, let's see. Add rects. Anything in here we need to change? Yeah, we're going to change this to we're going to modify this to use jQuery equivalent. So get element by ID. We move that to that. Fetch the element with that ID. And then dot value, what's wrong with this? Dot text. Well, so the number is a text field. So it's a form control element, so we need to use dot value to get the value that's in the text field. We can't use dot text in order to get that. I don't think we can do that. If we want to get the value that's inside of it, we have to do something else. Remember? So it's the jQuery .val function. .val just basically gets the value out of it. It basically just says, actually, the equivalent to this is if we said var, number equals document dot get element. No, actually, the equivalent of this with jQuery, I can get the number element. There's a special thing that you can do on any jQuery object. Any jQuery object can be used kind of like an array. If you use it like an array, you will extract the DOM objects from within this jQuery object. So I know that this happens to only return a single DOM object, right? So this jQuery object has an array inside of it that has only a single element in it. I can do this to get the 0th element out of that list of DOM objects. Now this is a DOM object. I can say dot value. Okay, So once I get a DOM object outside of this jQuery object, I can use the standard HTML, standard DOM stuff on it. I can say .inner HTML equals, I can say, .source equals, I can do all of this stuff. But on this jQuery object itself, I can't do this. I can't say .value equals, I can't say .inner HTML and so on. Because this is a jQuery object. The jQuery object has the jQuery methods. It doesn't have the standard DOM stuff. It has standard DOM objects inside of it. Okay, so .val, create recs, event.prevent default, stop propagation, that's all the same. Okay, so maybe let's switch this up so that it creates it using jQuery. So in order to do that, we'll do this. Maybe we'll add the $sign here just to indicate that this is a jQuery object that contains a standard DOM object instead of being just a standard DOM object itself. Add class .css position absolute. Okay, and these I kind of feel like are short enough that we can probably just go ahead and chain them. So yeah, that's okay. Let's see, yeah. Oh, we also need to attach the click handler to it though. So okay, maybe what we'll do is we will say rect.addClass. So we'll do the CSS related stuff there. And here we'll add the click handler. So click remove. So we handled that click handler. Okay, so we've got two different lines of stuff here that we're doing a little bit of chaining on each line, but each line is not too long. And these two are kind of related, and this is sort of somewhat related. So give random location to rect. So here we're going to need to, we're either going to need to adapt give random location so that it expects a jQuery object instead of a standard DOM object. So right here what it does is it assumes a standard DOM object. So we can either say $rect bracket 0 to get the 0th DOM object out of this jQuery object, or we can just pass the jQuery object and this will assume it's the jQuery object, and we can do this stuff in the jQuery way. $rect.css paren left comma top comma and then like that. There we go. And let's see, rectangle area, append child. What we can also do, let's see, so we're appending this rect into rectangle area. We can also just say append to rectangle area. We might not want to append it until after we've given it the proper classes, so maybe we'll just move that down here, rect.append to rectangle area. Yeah, that's probably good. Remove. Okay, so this remove function, we're attaching the remove function to this div here that we've just created. Do we need to modify this at all? This function? Will this function work as it is? I see a little bit of nodding. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so there are no parameters, so this remove function is being attached to this div. It's actually being attached to the DOM object itself. It's just that jQuery with this click function it takes this and it loops over all of the DOM objects and attaches this to each of the DOM objects. So it's still being attached to the DOM object itself. So inside of this, I can still say this still refers to the DOM object itself. So this remove function, it doesn't really have anything to do with jQuery. But if we want to do this the jQuery way, we still can. If we want to remove the element, we can just call .remove on the jQuery object. So we'd have to do something like this, .remove. And in order to get a jQuery object that represents the thing that we want to remove, the thing that we want to remove is this, right? So we can just do that. Excellent. Let's see, last couple of things. Query selector all, move that. We'll make this a jQuery object. Okay. This is a place where I was going to introduce this newer syntax next week after we learn Ajax, but I guess I'll just do it now. So there's something in JavaScript called the for each loop, similar to the one in PHP. If you have an object, so var foo equals some object, bar, hello world, baz 42. So if we have this foo object in JavaScript, we can say for thing in foo. If we say alert foo bracket thing. So thing is the name of a property. So this will be bar or baz. If we want to alert the value associated with that key, then we say foo bracket thing. Problem with this is that this for each loop was really unreliable before. There are details of why this was broken in previous versions of JavaScript, and because it was broken and has only recently been fixed, this is not a reliable thing to use. So if we want to iterate over a list of things, what we're going to have to do is, JavaScript libraries added the ability to iterate over things, basically doing for each loops. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace this with a for each loop using jQuery, so $rex dot each, and then so you pass to that an anonymous function. The first parameter to that is the key, and the second parameter is the value. The value is going to be a DOM object because this is a list of DOM objects, and in this case the key is just going to be like the index in that that array of DOM objects. So I'm pretty sure this is the order. It might be the reverse of this. Let's console.log value. That should be a DOM object. Oops. Let's comment. We're going to be doing this in there. We can just get rid of this. In value, we'll console.log those. When we click move, okay, yeah. So move rex, I was the first thing, and then value is the thing that we output second. So this is the element, the DOM element. We can give a random location to that element. So we're iterating over each of the DOM objects in this jQuery object. For each one, jQuery is going to call this anonymous function. It's going to pass in the index of that element in the array, and it's going to pass the element itself, and we just pass that element to give random location. Except it's not going to be that. That's not going to work just like that because so jQuery passes this as a standard DOM object, not as a jQuery object. Give random location now expects a jQuery object. So this will be passed as a DOM object. This expects a jQuery object. Fix that. Pass it through the jQuery function. Timers work exactly the same. I'm pretty sure there's no timer interface in jQuery. If there is, I haven't used it. Yeah. Mhm. No, this is some people just call this blessing. You're just passing this single element through the jQuery function, and the jQuery function doesn't. It knows that it's receiving a DOM object, and it does nothing. It doesn't do any kind of selecting. It doesn't do any like query selector alling or anything. It just puts this in its internal DOM object array and just returns like a new jQuery object that just contains that element. Yeah. So this is the so this Rex jQuery object internally contains an array of all of the DOM objects that were selected by this, right? So that internal array is just like a list of stuff. With each, we're iterating over that list, and this I being passed is the index of this element in that array that's inside of Rex. Is to say it again. This is where it started being declared. jQuery is automatically going to pass that as a parameter to this function. So this function is going to be run every time. So like for each element in this, this function is going to be run. jQuery is going to pass this I to indicate what index in the list of things that I'm iterating over this thing is at. So this element is at this index in the internal array of inside of that. Okay, so timer stuff, pretty sure there's no difference there. Let's see, just the last couple of things here, modify that. So that'll be a jQuery object. We can $sign.each over this, rex.each, function I element random stuff. We can say lm.style the background color. So again, so because this element here is a standard DOM object, then we can still do this element.style the background color. If we want to do it the jQuery way, we can do .css background color, comma that. Incidentally, so for these special properties that are that usually have dashes in CSS, you can actually, because this is a string we're passing here, you can actually use the original background dash color if you want. jQuery recognizes both of them. One thing that I would proudly note is that this is slightly faster. Because we don't have to create this new jQuery object, doing this the standard DOM way, as long as we have access to this single DOM element, and as long as this is not like super complex operation, which it's not, we're just setting a style, it might be a better idea if we just use the standard DOM way. So just because we're using jQuery doesn't mean we always have to use jQuery. We don't always have to take the jQuery approach. If we were doing something more sophisticated with this, maybe like, I don't know, if we were doing a bunch of stuff, like we're also attaching click handlers and we're also like setting other attributes and stuff all at the same time, it might be quicker and a little bit more concise if we use the jQuery syntax. But there is a little bit of overhead here in creating a jQuery object. So sometimes you might want to avoid that if you really want to optimize performance. So I think that's everything. We've modified this. Let's just make sure it still works. Color, move, add rex, color, move. Excellent. When we click, each one gets removed. Excellent. Okay, so that's all I have for today. That's an intro to jQuery. Next week, after we finish, so we started Ajax today in the regular class session. We'll be continuing Ajax through Wednesday or through Friday of next week. And next Friday, we'll talk about how using Ajax using jQuery, which is also equally concise. So we'll see you then. Oh, also, I'll probably post another extra credit. I won't post it this week, I don't think, but I will post another extra credit for basically just adapting some or maybe several homework assignments to use jQuery instead. But I probably won't do that until next week or maybe the following week.